The hull number was wrong. That was the first thing Port Commander Ethel registered when the vessel materialized at the edge of the Vareth station sensor grid. Not the fact that it had dropped out of FTL without a transit signature, not the archaic silhouette that matched nothing in the current recognition database, not even the complete absence of transponder signal that should have triggered an immediate security response. The hull number. She could see it on the optical feed, painted in faded characters along the vessel's forward section, and it was wrong because hull numbers in that sequence had not been issued to any active human vessel in over 60 years. She knew this not because she had memorized human naval registry conventions but because Vareth Station's trade relationships with human space meant she had processed enough human vessel documentation in 12 years of port management to know what current numbers looked like. That number was old. Very old. And the ship it was painted on was moving toward Vareth Station with the steady, unhurried confidence of something that had already decided where it was going. Vareth Station occupied a gravitational equilibrium point between two midweight stars in what the Conclave's cartographic conventions called the Outer Peripheral Reach, a designation that sounded more organized than the reality, which was that the Outer Reach was the galaxy's attic, full of things that had been put there because no one had decided what to do with them yet. Small civilizations, old trade routes, resource deposits that were significant enough to matter but not significant enough to fight over properly. Until 3 weeks ago, that had been true. The Murith sovereignty had arrived 3 weeks ago with a fleet of 43 vessels and the legal position that Vareth Station sat within boundaries defined by a territorial charter that the sovereignty had filed with the Conclave's administrative division 412 years ago and which had never been formally contested because no one had known it existed. The charter was real. The Conclave's archival team had confirmed it within 72 hours. Which was fast for an institution that normally moved with geological deliberation, but the Murith had been very organized about presenting the documentation and the archival team had been very motivated by the 43 vessels sitting at the station's perimeter. The species living on Vareth Station, roughly 14,000 individuals across 9 different civilizations, all of whom had believed their presence there was permanent and legally protected, had been given 30 days to vacate. 22 of those 30 days were already gone. 8 days remained. No fleet had come. The Conclave's response had been a strongly worded notification of review, which meant nothing. The human diplomatic mission had filed a formal objection on behalf of the 3,000 human residents, which also meant nothing because the human diplomatic mission's formal objection filing capability was not backed by any military presence in the sector. Human naval resources in the Outer Reach had been redistributed 18 months ago as part of a Conclave-mediated force reduction agreement that had seemed reasonable at the time and now seemed like a very expensive mistake. Ethel had sent 12 distress signals. She had received 11 responses, all of which were variations of "we are assessing the situation" delivered with the specific warmth of institutions that have already decided they cannot help and are looking for the most comfortable way to say so. The 12th signal had received no response at all. She had sent it to the Human Naval Registry. Standard emergency format. She had not expected anything. Human naval assets were weeks away, and the 30-day timeline made even a rapid response functionally useless. She had sent it anyway because she had run out of other things to do. 8 days ago. The ship appearing on her sensor grid now had dropped out of FTL approximately 4 hours after that signal was sent. This suggested a response time that was, by physics, impossible. "Run the recognition query again," Ethel said. Her systems officer, a young Velhari named Kale whose secondary eyes had been fully dilated since the ship appeared, ran it again. "No match in current registry," he said. Cross-referencing historical records. The pause. "Commander, the hull configuration matches a human vessel class designated." He stopped. "Designated what?" He looked at her. "Designated remnant class. The database entry is flagged as historical. The last active remnant class hull was decommissioned 63 years ago." "Decommissioned means retired." Scrapped. "Non-functional." "Yes, Commander." "So what is that?" He had no answer. The sensor feed showed the vessel continuing its steady approach, making no effort at evasion, broadcasting no communication on any standard frequency, simply moving. Hail it, Ethel said. Kale sent the hail. Standard approach frequency, conclave protocols, translated into the 3 most common human communication formats. Silence. 40 seconds. Then a voice came back through the communication system, not from the ship. The pingback locator showed a direct transmission rather than a relayed one, and the voice was human, and it said 5 words. We see you. Hold on. That was all. The Murith fleet had also noticed the vessel. Ethel knew this because Fleet Commander Greth, the Murith officer overseeing the Vareth station perimeter, had sent her a communication approximately 8 minutes after the vessel appeared, which told her he'd had it on his sensors for at least that long before deciding to make contact. The communication was brief. It said, Commander Ethel, identify the vessel approaching from bearing 27 Mark 9. She sent back, unknown. We're attempting to make contact. His response took 4 minutes. Longer than it should have, for a simple acknowledgement. The vessel matches no active registry. Its approach vector places it in direct trajectory with this fleet's perimeter position. Advise it to alter course. We've attempted communication. Limited response. Another long pause. The vessel should be advised that the Murith sovereignty's territorial authority in this sector is legally established and we will enforce perimeter security. Ethel read this twice. She wrote back, Understood. I will pass your message along. She did not pass the message along, partly because she had no reliable way to reach the vessel and partly because she had a feeling, imprecise, not yet fully formed, but present, that the message would not accomplish what Greth intended it to accomplish. She zoomed in on the vessel's hull on the optical feed. The registry number. The faded paint. The configuration that matched nothing in current use. She pulled up the historical database entry for Remnant-class vessels. Read it. Read it again. Then she sat very still for a moment. Kale, she said. What was the operational role of Remnant-class hulls? He checked. Long-range autonomous patrol. Extended deployment capability. Designed for, he stopped reading. Looked up. Designed for operations in contested sectors where fleet support was unavailable or impractical. She looked at the feed. So it was built, she said slowly, to go places where no one was coming to help. Yes. And to stay there. That was the operational doctrine, yes. Remnant-class vessels were designed for deployment periods of, he read the figure and then read it again, 18 to 24 months. Independent of resupply. With full combat capability maintained throughout. One ship. One ship. Designed to hold a contested sector, she said, alone. She looked at the vessel on her feed. At the unhurried, decided quality of its approach. How long ago was the last one decommissioned? 63 years. Why? He scrolled further into the entry. The doctrine became obsolete. The conclave's security framework expanded. The need for single-vessel independent patrol was eliminated by treaty coverage. He looked up. They were retired because the conclave was supposed to make them unnecessary. She looked at the ship. Apparently someone disagreed, she said. The vessel closed to within communication range, clear communication range, the kind that didn't require a directed transmission beam, at 1,400 station time. Ethel was on the bridge. She had not left since the ship appeared. She had consumed 2 meals at her station, which she had done on 6 occasions in 12 years and which her staff recognized as an indicator of conditions that required their full professional attention. The communication came unsolicited on the open station frequency. Vareth station, this is the persistence. The pause. I know you've been trying to reach us. The relay was damaged about 40 years ago and we never fully fixed it. Sorry about that. Could you connect me to whoever is in charge of the evacuation coordination? Ethel keyed the response herself. This is Port Commander Ethel. I'm coordinating evacuation. Who am I speaking with? A slight delay. The kind that comes from a single person making a decision about what to say, not from communication lag. Captain Roan. Of the Persistence. Another pause, shorter. I understand you have 8 days. 7, she said. As of this morning. 7. A breath, barely audible. All right. What are your transport assets? She stared at the communication panel. Captain, what are your intentions? To help with the evacuation. What transport assets do you have? We have 9 civilian carriers. 3 freight haulers that can be configured for passenger transport. Capacity for approximately 60% of the resident population in a single run, assuming we can coordinate with the receiving stations in the inner reach. She paused. The Murith fleet has indicated they will enforce their perimeter. No vessel has been prevented from departing yet. The 30-day period is still active, but there is concern that any transport coordination that appears organized may be interpreted as resistance, Roan said. Yes. It won't be, he said. Not the transports. Begin loading as soon as you can. I'll coordinate with the Murith fleet directly. Captain, I need to understand what you intend to do. 1 vessel. 1 is enough for this. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It had the specific quality of someone stating a fact about the weather. Get your people loaded. How many humans in the resident population? Approximately 3,000. Are they willing to stay? She blinked. I'm sorry. The human residents. Have they agreed to evacuate? Captain, the Murith sovereignty has legal. I know what they have. The same flat, factual quality. Have the human residents agreed to leave? She thought about the meeting she'd had 2 days ago. The 3,000 human residents of Vareth Station. Traders, technicians, families who had been here for generations, people who had built lives on the assumption that their presence was permanent. The meeting had been difficult. There had been anger that she had expected and grief she hadn't, and a particular quality of stunned disbelief that came from people confronting the gap between what they had been promised and what was actually happening. She thought about what Elena Marsh, the elected spokesperson for the Human Residential Council, a woman in her 60s whose family had lived on Vareth for 3 generations, had said when Ethel asked about evacuation cooperation. We'll cooperate because we don't have a choice. But we're not going quietly. I want that on the record. We're not going quietly. They've agreed to cooperate with evacuation, Ethel said carefully. They're not, Captain. Some of them have been here for 40 years. Their cooperation is contingent on their objection to the situation being formally recorded. The pause. Put me through to Elena Marsh, Roan said. Ethel looked at Kale. Kale looked back. You know her name, Ethel said. She was the one who filed the formal objection with the human diplomatic mission. Another pause. I read everything available before we arrived. Put me through. She patched the connection. She kept herself on the line. Not secretly, she told Roan she was doing it, and he said that's fine without hesitation. Elena Marsh's voice came through with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been awake too long making decisions they resent having to make. Who is this? Captain Roan. Persistence. A silence. I've been watching your ship on the feed. You came alone. Yes. 1 ship. Yes. Against 43. I'm not here to fight 43 ships, he said. That's not what this is. Then what is it? The pause before his answer was longer than the others. When he spoke, his voice had the same factual quality, but something under it had shifted, not softer, more direct, the way a person speaks when they've stopped selecting for the comfortable version. Your grandmother's family helped build the station, he said. Your children were born here. You have a fruit tree in your residential unit that your wife planted 11 years ago that you can't take with you. A breath. I read everything, Ms. Marsh. I know what this place is. And I know that you shouldn't have to leave it. And I know that the fact that you have to is wrong in a way that the law and the conclave and the territorial charter have all failed to prevent. She was quiet for a moment. So what are you doing here? Her voice was different now. Controlled, but different. I'm making sure it's on the record, he said. Everything that happens in the next 7 days. Every decision the Murith fleet makes. Every position the conclave takes. Every consequence. On the record, with a human vessel present as witness. The pause. And I'm making sure the people who need to leave have everything they need to do it safely. You can't stop this, she said. No, he agreed. Not today. 2 words that should have been a concession but didn't land like one. They landed like the beginning of a much longer sentence. Not today, she repeated. Get your people ready to load, he said. I'll handle the Murith fleet's communication. You focus on your people. The Murith fleet's response to the Persistence arrived at Ethel's station as a copy. Fleet Commander Greth had sent it to her directly, which she found interesting, as though he wanted her to know what he'd said. It read, Unidentified vessel. You are operating in Murith's sovereignty territorial space under a charter confirmed by the Galactic Conclave. Identify yourself and state your intentions. Any action interpreted as interference with authorized territorial enforcement will be treated as an act of aggression. The Persistence responded on the same frequency, openly, so that every vessel in the sector received it. The response said, Fleet Commander Greth. This is the ESS Persistence, Human Naval Registry, hull designation R77 Actual. We are conducting humanitarian observation and resident evacuation support under Conclave Protocol 14, Article 9, which grants any member vessel the right to provide evacuation assistance to civilian populations during territorial transitions. We don't intend to interfere with your enforcement. We intend to make sure the evacuation is completed safely and that the full record of this transition is transmitted to the Conclave, to human diplomatic channels, and to independent news services within broadcast range. Ethel read this 3 times. Kale said, Protocol 14, Article 9. Is that real? She pulled it up. Yes. She kept reading. She stopped. It's a very old provision. Rarely cited. It was written for exactly this kind of situation, forced civilian relocation under territorial dispute. Does it grant the Persistence any protection from the Murith fleet? She read further. It requires any party conducting authorized territorial enforcement to permit the observing vessel freedom of movement and communication. She looked up. If Greth moves against the Persistence while it's conducting authorized Protocol 14 activity, the Murith sovereignty is in violation of Conclave law. Which means the 43-ship legal position they've built, Kale said slowly, becomes legally compromised if they touch one ship. Yes. He looked at the sensor feed. At the Persistence, still moving at its steady pace. He didn't come here to fight, Kale said. He came here to make fighting the Persistence cost more than it was worth. Ethel was thinking about something else. About the broadcast. About the phrase independent news services within broadcast range. Kale, what news vessels are currently within broadcast range of this sector? He checked. 3. 2 Conclave affiliated, 1 independent. Were they there before the Persistence arrived? He checked again. Longer this time. No, he said. The independent vessel appeared approximately 6 hours after the Persistence dropped out of FTL. The 2 Conclave-affiliated vessels arrived. He stopped. Commander. They arrived before the Persistence. She stared at him. Before. By approximately 14 hours. She sat with that for a long moment. The Persistence didn't bring the news vessels. They had arrived first. Which meant, she worked through it. Which meant someone had known, before the Persistence even arrived, that the Persistence was coming. Had arranged for coverage to be in place before the ship appeared. Who coordinates news vessel positioning? She said. Who has the network access to? Human Diplomatic Services, Kale said quietly. They manage media coordination for the Outer Reach through a subsidiary communication bureau. The diplomatic mission. The one that had filed the formal objection. The objection that meant nothing by itself. Except that it hadn't been by itself. It had been the first piece. He didn't come alone, she said. He came in one ship, Kale said. That's different from coming alone. She looked at the feed. At the Persistence, at its faded hull number, at the steady, unhurried approach. He came with witnesses. He came with a legal provision. He came with 7 days and a complete understanding of exactly what he could and couldn't do within them. She paused. What else did he bring that we haven't found yet? On the 3rd day of the 7, Ethel found the next piece. It came in the form of a communication from a legal research institution in the Inner Reach, one she had not contacted, had not been aware of, had no relationship with. The communication was addressed to her, to the Murith Fleet's legal officer, to the 3 news vessels, and to the Conclave's territorial disputes division simultaneously. It concerned the 412-year-old territorial charter. Specifically, it concerned a subsection of that charter, Section 14, Paragraph 3, in the original Murith legal language, which, according to the research institution's analysis, included a residency continuity provision. A clause, standard in Murith territorial law of that era, that established that any population resident in a claimed territory for a period exceeding 2 generations would acquire a form of residency right that superseded territorial transition, meaning they could not be compelled to leave even if the territorial claim was upheld. The legal institution's communication noted that at least 412 of the human residents of Vareth Station could document 2-generation residency. It noted that this provision had never been formally invoked because no one had known to look for it, and it had not been mentioned in the Conclave's expedited review of the charter because the review had focused on the territorial claim rather than the residency provisions. It included a full legal brief, 87 pages, impeccably sourced. The communication had been requested by a human diplomatic bureau contact 11 days ago, 3 days before the persistence arrived, 10 days before Ethel had any idea the charter had residency provisions. Cale read the communication and then looked at her. He knew about this before he arrived. Before we knew the charter existed, she said. He arrived 6 hours after your distress signal. The distress signal he couldn't have received in time to respond to. She and Cale looked at each other. He was already coming, Cale said. Before your signal. He was already coming before we knew we needed him, she said. He'd been watching this develop. The Murith charter filing, the Conclave's review, the fleet positioning. He'd been watching and preparing and coordinating and, she stopped. How long? If the legal brief was requested 11 days ago. That's the last piece. The pieces before it would have taken, she tried to calculate. The news vessels, the legal research, the Protocol 14 invocation, properly arranged, with institutional coordination, probably months. He's been preparing this for months. Since before the Murith fleet arrived. How did he know the Murith fleet was coming? She had no answer. Not yet. What else is coming? She said. What's the next piece? The next piece arrived on day 4, and it was not what she expected. It was Elena Marsh on the communication channel at 0300 station time. Her voice had no exhaustion in it now. Something else had replaced it. Something Ethel recognized with difficulty as controlled anger being converted into fuel. Commander, I need you to know something. Captain Roan contacted our residential council 2 hours ago. He told us about the residency provision. He told us 412 families may have legal grounds to remain. The pause. He also told us it would take 18 months to litigate. Minimum. And that during those 18 months, the Murith sovereignty's claim gives them administrative control of the station. Yes, Ethel said carefully. So the provision exists but it's not protection. Not immediately. That's correct. He told us that too. Another pause. He didn't hide it. He laid out the full picture. What the provision could do. What it couldn't. What the timeline looked like. What it would cost the families who stayed to pursue it versus evacuating. Her voice did something complicated. He let us decide. What did you decide? 218 families are staying, she said. The ones who qualify under the provision and who are willing to take the 18 months. A breath. He told us he'd stay too. The persistence will remain in sector for the full litigation period. Observer status. Protocol 14. The pause. He said the news vessels would stay. Ethel looked at the sensor feed. At the persistence, currently holding position at the station's secondary docking approach, running dark except for navigation lights. One ship. 63 years old. He told you he'd stay, she said. For 18 months. He said the persistence was built for it, Marsh said. Extended independent deployment. He said that's what she was for. Did he say anything else? The pause. He said, she stopped. Started again. He said the Murith sovereignty's legal position is strong. Their charter is real. The territorial claim will probably hold. He said he was not going to promise us an outcome. But he stayed. He said the residency provision was real too. And that real things, pursued by real people with proper witnesses and a complete record, have a way of eventually matching. She was quiet for a moment. He said he'd seen it happen before. Ethel looked at the hull number on the optical feed. The number that had been wrong, that had been 60 years out of sequence with any active registry. How old is the persistence? She asked Cale. He checked the historical database. Read the answer. Looked at her. 91 years, he said. How many deployments? He read further. His expression changed. 14, he said. 14 independent patrol deployments. The shortest was 8 months. The longest was, he stopped reading for a moment. The longest was 31 months. During the Kareth border dispute. It was the only human vessel in the sector. He looked up. The dispute was resolved in year 2. The resolution included residency protections for the civilian population. She looked at the ship for a long time. 91 years old. 14 deployments. 14 times sent somewhere alone, to a contested sector, to do something that one ship couldn't win by force, and had won anyway, through patience, through presence, through making the cost of ignoring the situation higher than the cost of resolving it. Never scrapped. Never decommissioned. Someone kept it operational for 91 years, she said. Off the active registry. Outside the force reduction agreements. The shape of it was finally becoming clear. Because someone understood that there would be places the Conclave's framework wouldn't reach. Places where one ship with the right doctrine and enough time could do something no fleet could. Who? Cale said. She thought about the diplomatic mission. The legal bureau. The news vessels positioned before the ship arrived. The 11 days of institutional coordination. The months of preparation before that. Roan isn't acting alone, she said. The persistence isn't acting alone. There's an infrastructure behind this. Quite old. She paused. How many Remnant-class vessels were built before the class was retired? 11. How many were confirmed scrapped? He looked longer. 8. She looked at him. 3 unaccounted for, she said. He nodded slowly. Where are the other 2, she said. He had no answer. She hadn't expected one. That question belonged to a much larger investigation than she could conduct from Vareth Station. She was just beginning to understand that what she was watching wasn't a single old ship acting on instinct. It was the visible edge of something deliberate, built over decades, specifically for the gap between what the Conclave promised and what it could deliver. A gap that had always existed. A gap that someone had decided, quietly, to fill. The evacuation completed on day 6. 11,042 people loaded onto the 9 civilian carriers and 3 configured freight haulers and departed Vareth Station in a convoy that the Murith fleet watched and permitted, because the 30-day provision was still technically active and because Fleet Commander Greth had become, over the past 6 days, increasingly aware that every decision his fleet made was being transmitted in real time to 3 news vessels and through them to every interested party in the inner reach. He permitted the convoy to depart. He did not permit it warmly. His communication to Ethel on departure day was professional and cold and contained a formal notation that the Murith sovereignty's territorial claim was not diminished by the evacuation's completion. She replied that she understood. She did not tell him about the 218 families who had stayed. He would know soon enough, when the residency provision was formally filed with the Conclave's territorial court. She did not tell him about the persistence, which was not departing. He found out about the families 3 hours after the convoy left. His response to Ethel was brief and sharp and contained the word unacceptable twice. She forwarded it to the news vessels. Then she went to the secondary docking approach and she walked down the connecting corridor to where the persistence had hard docked, and she knocked on the airlock. It opened after about 30 seconds. Captain Roan was not what she had built in her mind over 6 days of communication. She had constructed, from the voice and the preparation and the doctrine, someone large and certain and deliberately composed. The man in the airlock doorway was medium height with the specific worn quality of someone who had been doing something demanding for a very long time and had long since made peace with the fact that it would not end. He was older than she'd expected. Not old, but carrying age in a particular way. "Commander Ethel," he said. "Come in." The interior of the Persistence was old in the way that well-maintained old things are old. Not broken, not declining, but carrying the evidence of long use in every surface. The fittings were the right shape but subtly different from modern equivalents. The displays worked perfectly and ran on interface conventions that were 60 years out of date. The air recyclers produced a faint background tone that modern systems had eliminated. It was alive. Fully, carefully alive. She had expected a larger crew. The ship was rated for 40. She counted 8 people. 8, she said. 8 is enough for what we do, he said. 18 months, she said. 8 people. 91-year-old ship. She runs well. No defensiveness in it. Just fact. Captain. She sat in the chair he indicated. He sat across from her. The other Remnant-class vessels. The ones not confirmed scrapped. He looked at her for a moment. You did the math, he said. 3 built and unaccounted for. You're 1. Yes. Where are the other 2? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. 1 is in the Dravath sector, he said. There's a territorial dispute developing there. Mining rights. 6,000 civilian residents. He paused. It's been there for 3 months. And the third? The third is, he stopped. Looked at the table. The third one didn't make it back from the Kessler situation 11 years ago. The way he said it. The specific weight of it. Not the ship, not only the ship. How many crew? She said quietly. 12, he said. She sat with that. You kept going, she said. After losing a ship. 12 people. You kept the program running. We're not a program, he said. Not officially. We're not anything officially. We're 3 ships. 2 ships, kept operational by people who decided the gap needed to be filled and that filling it was worth the cost of filling it. He looked at her directly. It's always been worth the cost. Even when it wasn't. That doesn't make sense, she said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He said it without apology. Without the self-consciousness of someone defending an irrational position. Just acknowledgement. Correct. It doesn't make sense. We continued anyway. She thought about what that meant. Not as strategy. Not as doctrine. As a way of being in the world. The specific human quality she had been observing for 6 days and had not yet found the right word for. Persistence wasn't quite it. Persistence implied stubbornness, the refusal to update. This was something else. Something that had fully calculated the cost, had acknowledged the loss, had understood that more losses were coming, and had continued not because it was rational but because the people in the gap needed someone to continue. The residency provision, she said. You found it before you arrived. How? I've been reviewing territorial charters in the Outer Reach for 4 years, he said. Every one filed in the last 5 centuries. Looking for dormant provisions that could be activated. The pause. The Murith Charter took 8 months to translate properly. The legal language is archaic. You've been preparing for this for 4 years. I've been preparing for something like this, he said. The Outer Reach territorial framework has been unstable for a decade. Someone was going to file an ancient charter claim eventually. We needed to be ready. He paused. We needed the legal infrastructure ready. The media coordination ready. The Protocol 14 invocation ready. So that when it happened, we could be somewhere in 7 days. You were already moving when my signal came in. We were 3 days out, he said. Your signal confirmed the destination. She looked at him. At the worn quality of the ship around them. At the 8 people she'd counted. This is not sustainable, she said. No, he agreed. 2 ships. 8 people each. 3 unaccounted for remnant hulls of which 1 is gone. You cannot cover the Outer Reach with 16 people and 2 90-year-old vessels. No, he said again. We can't. Then what is the point? He looked at her steadily. The point, he said, is that when the conclave's framework fails and the legal instruments are inadequate and no fleet is coming and 14,000 people have 7 days, the point is that someone came. He paused. Not to win. We're not winning this. The Murath sovereignty's claim is real and the litigation will take 18 months and at the end of it the territorial ruling will probably still go against us, residency provisions and all. Another pause. But 218 families are still in their homes tonight. And the record is clean. And the conclave's territorial court has a formal residency claim on its docket that it cannot ignore without damaging its own precedent framework. And the news vessels have 47 hours of documented footage of a 43-ship fleet being held at arm's length by an ancient protocol and an unarmed civilian observation ship. He looked at his hands. Those things matter. Not because they win today. Because they change what tomorrow costs. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, through the hull, Vareth Station was quiet. 11,000 people gone. 218 remaining. A Murath fleet at the perimeter, waiting, calculating whether the costs had changed. The persistence was right here. 91 years old. 14 deployments. 8 crew. Still here. I'm staying, Ithel said. Roan looked at her. Vareth Station still needs a port commander, she said. For the 218 families. For the duration of the litigation. She held his gaze. My contract runs for another 14 months. Within the litigation window. The pause. I wasn't planning to stay. I have a transfer offer. Inner reach posting, much easier assignment. She paused again. I'm not taking it. He looked at her for a long moment. You understand what the next 18 months look like, he said. The Murath administrative presence. The legal proceedings. The uncertainty. Yes. You understand that we might lose the residency claim at the end of it. Yes. Then why? She thought about Elena Marsh's voice at 0300. About 218 families who had calculated the cost and decided to pay it. About a fruit tree someone had planted 11 years ago that couldn't be taken but couldn't be left behind either. Because someone came, she said. And staying is the next part of that. Roan was quiet. Then he said, Welcome to Protocol 14, Commander. The Vareth Station residency litigation concluded 22 months later, 4 months beyond the initial estimate. The ruling was partial. 146 families received confirmed residency rights under the Charter's dormant provision. 72 cases were remanded for further review on the basis of documentation gaps. The Murath sovereignty retained administrative authority over the station's commercial operations but was required, under the ruling's terms, to accommodate the confirmed residents and to permit conclave observer presence for the duration of the review period. It was not a victory. Roan had been right about that. But 146 families were still in their homes. The persistence departed Vareth Station 11 days after the ruling. Ithel stood at the observation deck and watched it go. The faded hull number, the running lights, the steady unhurried departure vector that matched exactly the quality of its arrival. She had learned, in 22 months, that the 8 crew aboard the Persistence were not special in any way that made conventional sense. They were not the best fighters or the most brilliant legal strategists or the most experienced diplomats. They were people who had decided to do a specific thing and had been doing it, steadily, for a very long time. Roan had been on the Persistence for 23 years. The oldest crew member had been aboard for 31. She thought about Greth. About the Murath fleet commander who had spent 22 months watching a 91-year-old vessel sit at Vareth Station's docking approach, running dark except for navigation lights, broadcasting nothing, simply present. She had spoken to him twice in that period, brief professional exchanges. The second one, 3 days before the ruling, had been different. He had said, Commander Ithel, your vessel, the Persistence. What about it? A long pause. How long has it been in service? 91 years. Another pause. That's not possible. It's well maintained, she had said. And he had been quiet for a long time before he said, carefully, with the specific quality of someone touching something they don't want to examine too closely, I want you to understand that we did not expect this. Any of this. the protocol invocation, the residency provision. He stopped. Our legal team spent 7 months preparing this claim. We anticipated every scenario we could model. Yes, she said. We didn't model this one, he said. What specifically? The ship that comes alone, he said. To a place no fleet will defend. With no weapons and no chance of winning and no plan to leave. His voice carried something she recognized with surprise as a form of disquiet. We didn't account for the kind of species that does that. She had not replied immediately. She had been thinking about how to say what she wanted to say without it sounding like a threat, because it wasn't a threat. It was just true. The thing about the persistence, she had said finally, is that it isn't the only one. It's just the one you can see. Greth had ended the communication. She had never heard from him again. Now she stood at the observation deck and watched the persistence go. Watched it until the navigation lights were indistinguishable from stars. Watched it until it translated to FTL and was gone. Somewhere in the Dravath sector, another ship was already waiting. Somewhere in an archive Ethel had never seen, someone was reviewing territorial charters filed in the last 5 centuries, looking for dormant provisions, building a file, preparing for the next time the gap opened between what the galaxy promised and what it delivered. Not a program. Not officially. Something older than programs. Something that had simply decided at some point too far back to trace that the gap would be filled. That when the fleet didn't come, when the conclave reviewed and the legal instruments were inadequate, and the 30-day clock was running and there was nothing between 14,000 people and the thing coming for their homes. Something would come anyway. Not to win. To stay. Because in 91 years, across 14 deployments, against every calculation that said one ship wasn't enough, the persistence had learned and relearned and kept learning the same lesson that every civilization watching it from a distance could never quite accept was real. That showing up is not the same as winning. And that sometimes, in the specific dark of a contested sector where no fleet is coming and no one is watching and the cost of staying has already been counted and accepted, showing up is the only thing that matters. The navigation lights became